Okay, so his first map here shows growth of the Japanese Empire, and we've got a question here: explain the historical or geographic circumstances for the historical developments shown on the map. Can somebody remind me what we mean when I ask about historical circumstances? I'm just going to put half these lights back on. Grace, what's historical circumstances? What led up to it? Okay, we're still at a point where some people are like looking into the document or explaining what they see in the document or inferring based on the document. You don't do that with these. Okay, so you guys tell me, what would be a historical event in history that we've learned about that would explain why we see this Japanese expansion? What the heck happened? Kathleen, what happened? Why is Japan going after China and Korea on this map? Okay, right, so they want natural resources. Give me an event that Japan had that would necessitate their going after natural resources. That's good. We're like an Ava country, Bon Jovi time, halfway there. The Meiji Restoration. Just what happened during the Meiji Restoration? The industrialized, exactly, right? So we have to mention a historical event that preceded this and then try to make some kind of a connection. Right, so what I did was I kind of embedded some instructions on here in case you ever want a refresher on how to do these things. Okay, we could choose a historical or a geographic circumstance in this case because it said you could do one or the other. All right, so I'm going to choose historical circumstance, right, an event that preceded it rather than a geographic factor. You could say something along the lines that Japan lacked natural resources for industrialization, which is why they were expanding. But I'm going to use a historical circumstance, all right? So I'm going to take this phrase right here, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to do Control-Shift-V in the box. And it'll match the formatting of the box. It'll get rid of the italicized font for you guys. All right, and I'll put what Meg said. I'll put the Meiji Restoration. Okay, this is really not enough though. You want to make some kind of connection between that event and what's shown on the map, right? So I'm just going to simply summarize. I'm going to say during this event in Japanese history, they industrialized and therefore they required natural resources. It's very simple, right? During this time period, Japan industrialized and it required natural resources in order to power its factories. Okay, if you remember, Japan does not really have a lot of resources on its own. It relies on a lot of trade or imperial expansion in this case. Very good, excellent. That's all you need to do. Done. So the second question here is a purpose question, and it's about a source from Hiroshima Diary, September 30th, 1945. The view where a moment before had all been so bright and sunny was now dark and hazy. What had happened? All over the right side of my body, I was bleeding. We've got Hiroshima was no longer a city, but a burned over prairie. To the east and to the west, everything was flattened. So forget the question for a second. What's the historical event that's reflected in this source? Bridget, what happened in history that would explain this source being written? Yeah, right, what did we do to Hiroshima? This is kind of what we touched on last week a little bit. I'm kind of scrapping the second half of that lesson, and we're kind of covering it here instead. What would explain, what did we do to Hiroshima? I know you guys know this. Kathleen, what did we do to Hiroshima? What did we drop on it? Rhymes with Clafomic Tom, atomic bomb, okay? We dropped one on Hiroshima, they didn't surrender, then we drop another one on Nagasaki, finally they surrender. So this question is asking the purpose for which this person wrote the document. And purpose means, again, why they wrote it. You have to, in this case, make a claim about purpose and then back it up with evidence. So why do you guys think this person is saying all these things? How dark and hazy it was. The heat was too intense to endure. My body was bleeding. The city was flattened. What do you think this person is trying to accomplish here? It should be more than just the person was trying to record history. It should be better than that. It should be more specific. What do you think they were trying to accomplish? Because they could have just said, oh, America dropped an atomic bomb, period. But they went about it in this way. Andy, what do you think? What is this guy looking to accomplish or to get people to know about? Any ideas? If he's talking about how he's bleeding, the city is flattened, It's all dark and hazy now. What do you think he's trying to get you to think about or know? The effects of the bomb has had on people, right? Or just how the bomb created such horrible conditions inside of the city. So let's start with that, right? The author's purpose for writing this document was likely to explain the negative effects of the atomic bomb. Good. Explain the negative effects of the atomic bomb. Are we done? No. What's the lame way we start the next sentence? This can be inferred from a document. This can be inferred from a document when it states. So if we're making the claim that the author's purpose here is to show the negative effects, we should give an example of a negative effect. Lindsay, what's a word or a phrase that shows something really bad happened in Hiroshima in that document? Yeah, right? All over the right side of my body, I was bleeding. So I'm going to take that phrase, right, when it states, quote, all over the right side of my body, I was bleeding, period, end quote. Right? An example of the negative effects of dropping an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Okay, next question. Always the third one is going to make you use both of the documents. Okay, when you get a cause and effect, I know we've done this before, we want to explain how the first document led to the second one. But we can't just say document 1 led to document number 2. So first, you want to identify the main idea of document 1, and then state that it led to the main idea in document 2, and then explain it. So if you were to summarize the main idea of document 1, Bridget, what's document 1 about? If you had to give it a 4 or 5 word summary. Yeah, okay, right, to keep it even more simple, you could just say Japan is expanding its territory, right? That's really all the map is telling us. The other stuff we kind of just added to it using our own historical knowledge. So I'm going to fill in this blank. I'm going to say Japan's conquering of land in Asia led to Japan's, I apologize, this is so boring. I'll try to tell some jokes in between. Japan's conquering of land in Asia led to, okay, so that's the main idea of document 1. The main idea of document 2, right, is Japan being attacked with an atomic bomb. Led to the United States dropping an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. That's the easy part, right? I'm stating that one led to the other. But here's where you have to explain it. This is where you have to fill in more of the story. How do we get to how do we go from Japan conquering land to using an atomic bomb? What's in the middle of this story? Something had to have happened to get us involved. Can you guys tell me any of that story? Japan expands its territory. What happens next in history? Something has to draw America's interest or attention, right, for us to get to Hiroshima. Just? Pearl Harbor could be part of the story? Is that what you were going to say? Okay. Do you guys remember why they attacked Pearl Harbor? Why they were irritated with us? Yeah, they thought that we would interfere with their plans, right? Because they were expanding their empire, taking over parts of Asia that belonged to America. So they thought maybe if they knock out Pearl Harbor first, we can't do anything about it and we can't stop their expansion. They were also upset because we stopped trading them something. Do you guys remember what we stopped selling Japan that they needed? Rhymes with foil. I heard it's part of that Grease play. I heard it. Who said it? Oil. Yeah. All right. So they attacked Pearl Harbor. What's the next part of the story? Because there's more to the story between Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima. What happens after Pearl Harbor? What did we declare on Japan? Rhymes with pour. War. All right, so let's put the whole story together, okay? That's what you have to do for the second part of these things. All right, so Japan's conquering of land in Asia led to the United States dropping an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Okay, Japan was upset that America stopped selling it oil and therefore attacked Pearl Harbor The U.S. then declared war on Japan. And eventually used the atomic bomb to get Japan to surrender, which caused a lot of human suffering. Okay, this last bit here is evidence from document 2. Remember, you have to use evidence from both documents in your answer. Okay, so I stated something from document 1 that led to something in document 2, and then I explained it. I tried to give the full story. All right, turning point. This is a type of question I haven't shown you guys a lot, but it's another one that you could possibly see on the Regents exam that also would require you to use both of the documents. Okay, without reading all this stuff, you should remember that a turning point is like an event in history that alters the course of things. Okay, so when you get a question about turning point, you have to ask yourself, all right, what the heck happened in between documents 1 and 2 that would have led to a change, right? Because if you see the first document shows Japan being successful, right? Nothing's destroyed here. They're the destroyers, right? They're going to China and doing horrific things, which we're going to talk more about later, some of the horrible things that they did in China once they got there, and in Korea, right? So they're expanding, they're successful. Then you get to document number 2, and some of these cities in Japan lay in ruins, on fire, people are dying. So what is an event that happened in the middle that kind of altered the Japanese history? You went from successful expansion to your cities are in ruins. What would be considered maybe a turning point event in between those two things? Okay, well this is the atomic bomb, right? So this document is showing us the dropping of the atomic bomb. So I would argue maybe something happened in between Japanese expansion and the atomic bomb that led us to this point. What happened in between that kind of altered the course of Japanese history, right? They're expanding, they're expanding, they're expanding. Something happens, and now Japan is suffering. What happened in between? Emma Davey, what do you think? What happened in between? Something had to alter the course of Japanese history to get to this period of suffering. Okay, that could be one, right? The U.S. declares war on Japan. That's absolutely a good turning point. You could probably use the event that caused us to do that, right? Isabella, what's the event that made us declare war on Japan? Japan bombing Pearl Harbor. Okay, that's the hardest part of these, is trying to think, all right, what the heck happened in the middle that would explain the change? The rest of it is easy, right? So the first thing we're going to do, I gave you the 3-step process, really 4-step process. Define or identify the turning point, describe what happened in that event, and then tell the history before and after, right? Because you really can't demonstrate a turning point unless you explain or show change over time. So I'm going to say a turning point associated with documents 1 and 2 was, and we'll do the Pearl Harbor one. A turning point associated with documents 1 and 2 was that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Okay, second phrase here says this event, comma, blank, describe the turning point using your knowledge of history. So I'm just going to explain the attack on Pearl Harbor. This was done in response to the U.S. stopping the sale of oil to Japan. Bless. All we have to do is explain a little bit of the history both before and after, which is easy because we have it from the documents, right? In document 1, Japan is successful, it's expanding. After the turning point, right, obviously we're trending towards Japan not being as successful. Japan is losing the war and suffering quite a bit, right? The opposite of its successful run in the 1930s. So before blank, name of turning point, and then the second blank, describe the history shown in document number 1. We're just going to summarize again. Before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan was successfully able to conquer additional territory. in Asia. That's the before, and that's the evidence from document 1, right? They're expanding their territory. After the attack, Japan lost its possessions, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki were in ruins after the U.S. dropped atomic bombs.
What does Hiroshima look like today?
Oh, it's all, you would never know that a bomb went off in Hiroshima.
Oh, really?
It's all built up. There's some memorials to what happened, but what happens right after World War II is that we pummel Japan, level the country, and then we stay there from 1945 to 1952 or 3, rebuild all the cities and turn Japan into one of our best friends, which is kind of weird to think about. But the reason why we did that is because we got really, really scared of the Soviet Union, and we thought if we have a friend in the area keeping check on them, keeping watch over them, and if we could have an American naval base in Japan keeping watch over the Soviet Union, that would benefit us. Plus, Japan made a lot of cool stuff, and trade is fun. Maybe you've heard of Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Sony, Nintendo, Mitsubishi, Suzuki, Yamaha. All that stuff is Japanese. So having stuff is cool. Let's move on. CRQ set number 2. We'll do a little bit more for today, and then we'll end a little bit early. So this one says, Nippon Times newspaper, Tokyo, August 10th, 1945. So I see the month, I see the year, I see where it's being written. I'm already thinking this is probably World War II, maybe even the atomic bomb. How can a human being with any claim to a sense of moral responsibility deliberately let loose an instrument of destruction which can at one stroke annihilate an appalling segment of mankind? This is not war. This is not even murder. This is purely a crime. What do you think he's calling out here? What do you think is the event that this person's referring to? What do you think, Priya? What is this horrible, appalling thing that has a lot of destructive power? The atomic bomb, okay? Calling it a crime, probably referring to the fact that so many civilians died, which is pretty horrific. This is a crime against God and humanity, which strikes at the very basis of moral existence. What meaning is there in any international law, in any rule of human conduct, in any concept of right and wrong, if the very foundations of morality are to be overthrown as the use of this instrument of total destruction threatens to do? Meaning, how could you claim to be moral when you're using this atomic bomb and you're killing innocent civilians? That's basically what they're saying here. So what I want to do before we end for today is explain the historical circumstances that led to the situation discussed in the document. So the situation discussed in this document is, again, the United States using the atomic bomb. If you get a question about historical circumstances, we got to describe how we got to that point. Like, what happened in history that would explain why we use the atomic bomb, right? We could have just invaded Japan. We did Okinawa, we did Iwo Jima. I showed you guys how we conquered those islands off the coast of Japan. We could have just launched an invasion. Why did we decide to not do that, you think, and instead use the atomic bomb? Maybe less effort, right? Whose lives are you saving by using an atomic bomb? Your own, right? American lives won't be lost. If you guys remember, this is something we talked about last time, right? We did this island hopping campaign. We launched an invasion of island after island after island after island. Some of those weren't so hard, but in some of those invasions, thousands of people were dying, both Japanese and American, right? The Japanese kind of had that old school samurai mentality of no surrender, right? They would rather take their planes and fly them into American ships than surrender, right? That kamikaze thing, right? So America's probably thinking, okay, if this is the case, and that it was so hard to invade both Iwo Jima and Okinawa, how the heck hard could it be? I'm sure it's going to be insanely hard to invade the major Japanese islands. Untold casualties could result. People were estimating up to 1 million American casualties if you were to launch an invasion of Japan. Okay, so we're going to kind of condense all that information into the historical circumstances. Okay, I'm giving you this information because I want to kind of review it from last time. One historical circumstance that led to the situation discussed in the document was America was involved in the island hopping campaign and thousands of lives were lost as U.S. soldiers made their way towards Japan. Okay, that's the historical event, and then we just want to try to connect that event to what is shown in the document. Right? So the document is showing us the atomic bomb. We want to connect these casualties to using the atomic bomb. So I'm just going to say this led to the decision to drop the atomic bomb to prevent any more American lives from being lost. To this day, people debate whether or not that was the right thing to do. And the argument is basically on the American side of things, well, we ended up saving a lot of lives on both sides because the Japanese seemed to not really be willing to surrender. So maybe we saved lives in the process, certainly American lives. So let's take a look at question number 2 here and the next document. Or question number 2, rather. All right, so question 2 says, explain how the audience affects what is written in the news article. If I'm asking you guys about intended audience, what is audience? What does audience mean? Linz? Yeah, who's going to be reading it? Who's it written for, right? The New York Times newspaper. Who do you think is the primary audience of the New York Times newspaper?
New York.
New Yorkers, okay? So since New Yorkers, good, Ava, are the primary audience, it's going to tailor what you put in the newspaper, right? You're not going to write newspaper articles celebrating the victories of the Boston Red Sox, okay, or the Boston Bruins, right? It's a New York newspaper. You cater to the New York audience first. It makes sense that a Japanese newspaper is going to say things to keep captivated a Japanese audience, right? If I'm a person living in Japan and I pick up the Nippon Times newspaper from Tokyo and it says, oh, how great it was that Hiroshima got bombed because Americans didn't have to die, I'm gonna be like, this is crap, right? I'm not gonna subscribe to this newspaper anymore, okay? Your audience affects what you publish and how you tailor your messaging to that audience, right? So you're gonna try to appeal to the people that are watching or listening, right? You gotta think to yourself, what do these people wanna hear about, right? What's not going to tick them off when they read it? So when you're asked to describe how the audience affects messaging, you should first identify the intended audience. This can be done using either wording from the document or the source information presented. Right? Since this information is talking about how the Japanese were affected negatively, right? Or rather how there's a negative effect with the atomic bomb, I can infer that the audience is Japanese people. Or I could pull the fact that the newspaper was published in Tokyo, right? Which can also show me that it was intended for a Japanese audience. So when you get a question like this, blank's intended audience was likely blank. Identify the author and the intended audience. I don't have the name of the author here, but I do have the name of the newspaper. Okay, so I'm going to simply say, and you're going to put this in the box down here. We're going to say, the Nippon Times, Times's intended audience was likely Japanese people. Stating what the audience is. Okay, I'm going to infer that based on not so much the wording in the document in this case, I'm going to infer it based on the sourcing information. Right? I'm going to say since it was published in Tokyo, it makes sense that Japanese people are going to be the ones reading that newspaper. So I will say this can be inferred from a document by the source information, which says, I'm going to paste that here, which says that it was published in Tokyo. Right? The New York Times is published in New York. Yes, all Americans have access to it, but the primary audience for the New York Times is New Yorkers. Right? The articles will be tailored to a New York audience. The Newsday newspaper typically has always been a Long Island audience. My dad worked for that company for like 30 years. Right? They published the paper on Long Island, not anywhere else, so it makes sense that Long Islanders will be the ones reading that newspaper for the most part. Okay, so the last thing we have to do here is explain how the audience affects the messaging. So to do that, you got to ask yourself a couple of questions. And I would argue that these audience questions, guys, are the most difficult. I know this is not very exciting, but we got to practice these things, right? Then ask yourself, what might that particular audience be interested in reading about? Or did the author leave out something important that the audience might not want to read? So when you see this source about the atomic bomb, you got to ask yourself, since the audience is Japanese, is there part of the story that's not there? Like when I look at this, right, it's saying, oh, the atomic bomb was a crime, it's horrific, it annihilated people, it's an instrument of destruction. Is there a part of the atomic bomb story that's not being reflected in here? You know, just because, like, the audience is Japanese, maybe, just?
The reason why atomic bomb?
So what's the reason?
They bombed Pearl Harbor.
They bombed Pearl Harbor, right? It's not telling that side of the story, right? That's a reason for why they did it. It's not being reflected in the source. What's another reason why they decided to use the bombs instead of just invading Japan? Priya? To save American lives. Okay, that's not being reflected here, right? If they said that, it's like, oh, it's a great thing that Americans lived. Japanese people don't want to hear that. So let's take a look here. Therefore, the author, emphasizes blank in the document while leaving out blank. Okay, so I'm going to take this and paste it, and we're going to fill in those blanks together. Therefore, the author emphasizes how the atomic bomb, I'm going to use the evidence from the article, was an instrument of destruction, and using it was immoral. While leaving out how using the bomb saved many American lives. Right? If this was published in the US about the atomic bomb, I guarantee the stories would be flipped. Like, oh, we use this new technology. Look how amazing our science programs are. Look how many thousands of Americans lived. Right? It would be definitely an alternate viewpoint, given that the audience would be American if this was published in an American newspaper. And many newspapers in America did say it, just like that. All right? Who's in your audience affects how you say things. You engage in some self-censorship. You want to keep your audience. All right? Document 2, Stephen Ambrose interview with soldier William Wild Bill from Band of Brothers, 2001. So let's just predict for a second. If I tell you that this source is about the atomic bomb, and it's going to come from an interview with Wild Bill from America, what do you think his point of view is going to be on it? Probably going to be on American side, probably, right? It's always good to try to predict when you can. So let's see if our prediction comes true. We were on garrison duty in France for about a month. That means you're stationed there and you're living in a barracks waiting to get into the war. And in August, we got great news. We weren't going to the Pacific. The U.S. dropped a bomb on Hiroshima, the Japanese surrendered, and the war was over. We were so relieved. It was the greatest thing that could have ever happened. Somebody once said to me that the bomb was the worst thing that ever happened, that the U.S. could have found another way. I said, yeah, like what? Me and my buddies jumping to Tokyo and the Allied forces going in and all of us getting killed? Wild Bill don't want to do that. Millions more Allied soldiers getting killed? Okay. Did our prediction come true? Yeah, right? He says it's the greatest thing that could have happened. Right? The complete opposite viewpoint. Wild Bill all about that atomic bomb here. Tough crowd today. So, if I ask you for point of view, what am I asking you to tell me? Good idea or bad idea? Good idea, right? It was a good, as you say. So, the author's point of view concerning the dropping of the atomic bomb was, we don't just want to say it was a good thing, right? Maybe we could say it was the right thing to do for America. All right, am I done with this answer? And this can be inferred from the document. What did it state? So, give me some evidence to prove that Wild Bill says this is good. Give me a word or a phrase from a document that suggests this is a good idea. Linz? Greatest thing that could have happened. Exactly, right? There's a lot of things you could pick. I would say this is a good sentence to use. It was the greatest thing that could have happened. All right, so let's take a look at this. Similarity and difference. Okay, on the Regents, you're going to get that CRQ question where you're forced to use both the documents together. We practiced 2 out of the 3 types of questions yesterday. We did a cause and effect. We did a turning point. The only other option of combining the documents together is this question about similarity and difference. I think these are easier than the turning point one, okay? But it's not enough. And on the midterm exam, I was really generous about this because we haven't really practiced this a lot. Okay, it's not enough to say document 1 said this, but document 2 said that. That's not clear enough. You have to identify what the difference or similarity is and then give examples from each document. Okay? So if you were asked this question, right? Identify a similarity or a difference between the attitudes about dropping the atomic bomb. Are the attitudes similar in these documents or different? That should be like really, really clear. Andy, are they similar or different? So you tell me, which one of these sentence frames should we choose? This first one or the second one? Second one. Documents 1 and 2 show different attitudes about dropping the atomic bomb. One supports using the bomb, while the other one rejects it, right? That's stating the very clear difference. It's not saying document 1 talks about this, document 2 talks about that. No, it's actually saying one supports it, one doesn't. So I'm going to drop that sentence frame right here. And you should do the same thing. Okay, so let's look at the next sentence frame here. Then we're going to do, for example, document 1 shows that the dropping of the atomic bomb was a bad idea because it. Let's copy that right here. What we're doing here is giving an example from each document that proves the claim that one says it's a bad idea, one says it's a good idea. So what does document 1 say about it being bad? It was a crime, right? They call it a crime against God and humanity, like a crime against a whole population of people, not just a murdering of one person. Okay, so I'm going to kind of paraphrase that because it was immoral, right? That was a word used in the document, and a crime against God and humanity. Okay, so that's document 1's evidence. Document 2 shows that dropping the bomb was a good idea because it, let's put that down here, because it saved American lives. Paraphrasing the evidence from document 2. Okay, so I think the hardest part of this is identifying what the clear similarity is or what the clear difference is and making that abundantly clear to the reader. How are they different? Tell me that, and then give me an example from each. How are they similar? Tell me an example from each. All right, turn your attention to this. What about this term enduring issue? Someone who's been quiet. Brianna, what's enduring issue? Do you remember? A long-lasting problem. Let's put it down there. A long-lasting or continuous problem. I'm going to also add a couple words here, or important topic for debate. Because some things that are issues are not always just problems, right? I would make the case that smartphones are an enduring issue, or technology as a whole is an enduring issue, right? Because it's great in a lot of ways, but maybe problematic in some areas, right? It's leading to us just constantly taking selfies of our foreheads and sending them to our friends when we should be studying for our tests. Okay, so an important topic or a problem that's occurred over the course of history. So when you're looking at these documents, can you find for me one example of an enduring issue in these documents? Right, we had the one about the Japanese conquering China, parts of China and Korea. We've got the atomic bomb stuff. We've got World War II. Meg? War. Let's put it down. War/conflict. And were you going to say the same thing? Yeah. Okay. I would argue that the Japanese attacking and conquering parts of China can be an enduring problem when you take it as like a general act, because that's occurred many times through our history. Right now, we see the Russians trying to take over Ukraine. What's that word we always throw around when one country tries to take over and often does take over another? Shannon, remember that word? Imperialism. I'm going to call imperialism an enduring issue. It's a problem, right? People lose their freedom, can't run their own government. I'm going to give you one more. Write this down.
One more joke.
All right, so if I say human rights violation, this is an enduring issue we're going to look at more closely, after this World War II test, and we're unfortunately going to have to practice another enduring issues essay. We have to do that. Human rights. Give me a person we learned about early in this school year that establishes this idea that all people are born with certain human rights. Do you guys remember the name of a person or a time period he comes from? Bree? John Locke, outstanding. What time period of history does John Locke get associated with that we learned about? Going back to like September. Sean? The Enlightenment. Does anybody remember which freedoms or rights you're born with according to John Locke? Liberty, right, which is freedom, good call. Land and life, okay? Life, land, and property, or life, liberty, and property, okay? When I say human rights violation is an enduring problem, I'm referring to this idea that governments actively try to deprive people of those freedoms. There was an event in World War II, maybe more than one. You're going to learn about a couple of them. We've skipped over some stuff in World War II we're going to go back to later. Is there a World War II event that involved a government denying a certain segment of the population life, liberty, and or property? There you go, the Holocaust. Okay? Right to life, denied to Jewish people. How? Auschwitz, death camps. Liberty, being forced to live in a ghetto or a concentration camp and work for the Nazis. Denial of liberty. Jewish people had their property stolen by the Nazis. Denied the right to property. Okay, and there were several of these events that occurred, unfortunately, during World War II and other times throughout history. Okay, so human rights violations is another example, unfortunately, of an enduring issue. And we see these acts of genocide occurring in the world from time to time. Is there one example of human rights violations that occurred in these documents? Could you make that case? The atomic bomb documents, right? Because civilians were denied the right to life. Okay, so we're going to kind of look at the atomic bomb in that context as well. All right, guys, so let's finish talking about this lesson where we're looking at CRQ questions and, diving into a little bit of the enduring issues associated with these documents. Okay, so in class today, we looked at how these documents could be used to justify or select a couple of different enduring issues that, that might correspond with them, right? So they're documents about World War II. So you can make the case that war and conflict could be an enduring issue associated with the documents. And remember, an enduring issue is a long-lasting problem or important, topic for debate that humans have always had to deal with. Right? War has been an ongoing issue in human history since day one. War is going on right now between Russia and Ukraine. Right? So since it's going on right now and it's been going on forever, war/conflict could be an example of an enduring issue. Right? Imperialism, another enduring problem, right? Things are problems, guys, when they affect people in some way, right? When one country takes over another, that affects the country being taken over, right? The country is being denied its freedom. Possibly the people in that country are enslaved and forced to work for the mother country. Perhaps the people are denied their natural resources. Again, and that would depend on the particular document, but imperialism obviously has a lot of effects on the people that are getting taken over. All right, human rights violations are an enduring issue, or that we're going to talk more about as the year goes on. All right, so the Holocaust is an example of a human rights violation. Okay, and another way you can kind of describe this, right? Sometimes these enduring issues have multiple names. You could also call this a denial of freedom. Okay, rights, freedoms mean the same thing. If I'm violating someone's freedoms, I'm denying them their freedoms. Okay, so the Holocaust is an example of a human rights violation, right? Jews during the Holocaust, right, when Nazi Germany was in power, were denied their right to life when they were sent to the death camps in Auschwitz and other places. They were denied their right to liberty, right, when they were enslaved by the Nazis and made to work in the work camps. And they were also denied their property, right? They were forced to leave their homes and relocate to the ghettos before being deported to concentration camps. And also, don't forget, the property of a lot of people was taken away by the Nazis. You could Google it, like image searches for like Auschwitz. There were like piles and piles of like suitcases and hats and eyeglasses that were taken from Jewish people by the Nazis. Right, so the Holocaust is not reflected in this lesson, okay? But what is the attack on Hiroshima, okay? And it's one of those cases where we don't really call this a human rights violation so much because the people responsible, right, the United States, they were not prosecuted for this, right? They are the ones who won World War II. And I'm not trying to deny that there were some positive reasons for doing this, right? It undoubtedly saved many American lives. But the fact of the matter is, many innocent civilians in Japan died or suffered as a result of these atomic bomb attacks. And one can make the case that that could be considered a violation of human rights or a denial of someone's right to life. Right. So again, that idea of human rights, life, liberty, property, John Locke, the Enlightenment. If I call something a human rights violation or a denial of freedoms, those are the types of freedoms that we're talking about here. You could lump freedom of speech in there as well. Certainly, Jewish people in Nazi Germany lacked freedom of speech, as did really anyone living under Nazi authority. All right. So going back to this lesson, let's just focus on human rights violations or denial of freedom as an example of an enduring issue associated with this document selection. When we say why is it considered an issue, we have to remember that something is an issue if it's a problem or a subject for debate that impacts people in some way, right? So I will say human rights violations. Let's make the text bigger here. And you should put this on your document as well. Human rights violations are an example of an enduring issue because people were negatively affected by them, and that oftentimes in history, people have been denied the right to life, liberty, or property. Okay. In this particular case, right, the document about the atomic bomb is really only discussing people's denial of, people being denied their right to life. Other documents might talk about people being denied the freedom of speech or denied the right to assembly or to protest. Okay. In this particular case, it's just about the denial of the right to life, right? So identify one specific document from a lesson that you could use to illustrate how or why the issue is enduring. All right, so I will pick the document from that Tokyo newspaper, right? Because it's calling the atomic bomb a horrible thing. Document 2 in CRQ set number 2 is talking about the atomic bomb, but it's from the American point of view, right? It discusses the positive things, right? So I don't see human rights being violated in document 2, but I certainly see them being violated in document 1, right? As, just talking about an instrument of destruction, a crime against God and humanity, right? So it's how it was appalling, right? So it's murder. So all these things, murder, right? So it says here, this is not even murder. This is purely a crime. So what they were kind of talking about here is that it's not really the murder of one person. It's the murder of an entire group of people, right? A murder against all of humanity. Right. So absolutely, this could be used to prove the human rights violation an enduring issue. Right. So I'm going to say for that question, I will say CRQ set number 2 and document number 1 for that answer. All right. So going back here, you're going to put for number 4, CRQ set number 2, document number 1. Which historical event is being depicted in the document? Okay, going back to when we wrote our enduring issues essay, okay, when you get a document about an event, you have to give it a title, right? And this is important when it comes down to like creating a thesis statement and describing the document. We don't just want to keep saying in our essay, document 2, document 1, right? We want to kind of give that document a historical event, that's associated with it, right? So which historical event is being depicted in document number 1? We're going to say dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. That's the historical event being discussed here. So number 6, use the document to explain the impact of your chosen enduring issue. Use the sentence starters below to help guide your writing. Blank, okay, so here we'll put the name of the event, which we just did up here, shows the enduring issue of blank, which is going to be human rights violations or denial of freedom. So let's start with that. Okay, so I'm going to take this sentence right here, and I'm going to copy it and paste it in this box. Let me just go ahead and delete that number. Okay, so for this first event, I'll also delete the parentheses here. I will say dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima shows the enduring issue of human rights violations, period. I'm going to select this text and I'm going to make it bigger so you can see that better. Next sentence frame. Okay, so in a document called blank, written in blank, the author describes the impact of the chosen enduring issue, and then we'll describe how people were affected by the document. All right, so let's start with this second building block here. Okay, so in a document called, right, so we have to find the name of the document. So let's go back and take a look. It is called, all we really have is the source information. So I'm going to use the Nippon Times newspaper. Okay, so not everything is always going to be so formulaic. You do have to kind of get creative sometimes, right? Not everything will fit in the sentence frames exactly. So in a document called blank, written in blank, how about we say in a document, or how about in an article from the Nippon Times newspaper, right? That sounds a little bit better here. In an article from the Nippon Times newspaper, written in 1945, that was the year. If you didn't know that, it's in the source information. Okay, the author describes the impact of name of enduring issue, human rights violations. All right, so then describe how people were affected by the issue in the document. All right, so how were people affected in the document, right? So obviously it's a short little document here, but it definitely talks about people being killed in an immoral way. All right, so I will just kind of summarize that in the last part here. All right, so maybe I'll say the document discusses how it was immoral that innocent people lost their lives as a result dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima during World War II. Okay, and this is what you would do, right? If you're writing an enduring issues essay, you basically have to discuss how people were affected by that issue in 3 documents, right? You choose the issue that matches up with 3 out of the 5 documents, and then discuss how people were affected by that issue in all 3, right? Effectively, when you do that, you're demonstrating that the issue is occurring across time, because each document will focus on a different time period, right? So this would be an example of like writing about one document, in the course of a set of 3. All right, so just a little bit of practice on writing about enduring issues. We're going to write an enduring issues essay again in the very near future. All right, so once you're done writing that paragraph, that really short paragraph, you can go ahead and turn in this assignment.